Hi there, I'm Brandon Jones, and I got Daniel Bloodworth,
Yo.
Brad Ellis,
Hey.
and Ben Moore.
Hello.
And we have all beaten Half-Life Alyx. It's been a fair amount of time since Ben beat Half-Life Alyx to review it for Easy Allies. And Ben came back to the crew and said, everybody's playing this. All of you have to play this. All of you have to check it out. Everyone that is able to do so. We played it. We awarded it our Game of the Year, and we are here to finally talk about spoilers. But unless you cannot play Half-Life Alyx, and you're just like, I'm just hearing too much about this game, and I want this game spoiled for me, this is really a special experience. Do not spoil this for yourself if you can avoid it. But if you have played it or don't care about spoilers, here they come. Spoilers start right now.
Spoiler mode, final warning, spoiler mode activated.
Ben, you reviewed Half-Life Alyx. I want to start
did.
with you. Is there anything just, we can jump straight to the ending. Was there anything specifically you're like, I can finally talk about this because I don't have to worry about spoilers. I don't have to worry about ruining the experience for anybody.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I actually, in preparation for this, I rewatched my review. And it's so hard because I do think the ending is one of my favorite parts of this game. But obviously, you can't go into details about the ending in your review. Or, you can, I suppose, but it would ruin it for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And it's just nice to be able to talk with you guys, and to the audience about the ending without, any fear. It's like, this is a safe space to talk about how cool and awesome and surprising that ending was.
Well, I need a little clarification in the ending. I have yet to go and find the Half-Life Alyx ending explained video or videos, I'm sure there are millions of them that are out there. Because when you talk about time travel, not only does this ending obviously spoil Half-Life Alyx, it spoils Half-Life for you. If you're not caught up, if you haven't played Half-Life 2 in Episode 1 and Episode 2, well, you're caught up now. And are we led to assume that Half-Life Alyx, then Episode 1, then Episode 2 happened, and then now she's going ahead in time? Because it's strange to me that Alyx knew that this was going to happen, but yet still went through the events of Half-Life 2 and Episode 1 and Episode 2. How does that work out? Does that make sense?
Well, okay, so you're asking chronology, because reading up on the story, again, in preparation for this, I believe the G-Man is taking Alyx because he's dissatisfied with Gordon, and the G-Man can kind of just do whatever he wants.
Right.
So and you kind of get this sense as you're going into the final area with that weird, where everything's upside down. He can just manipulate reality, it seems like. And so we are now at Half-Life 2, the end of Half-Life 2, Episode 2. We don't know what the G-Man is doing with Alyx, but we know we have to go after the G-Man. So Eli and Gordon are going after him. Does that clarify
I think
anything?
the Brandon question is how much does she know throughout Half-Life 2 about the G-Man and everything else, and her father dying? It's a really weird. It is a really weird thing, but it's it's almost as if. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how to explain that.
I thought he just I think all the events from Half-Life 2 and stuff still happen, and she didn't know, but it just changed that one part. It just jumped, I feel like. She didn't know about everything leading up to that part.
Yeah, maybe he dropped her out of this exchange that they had and without, the knowledge of what had happened. And it's I'll let you go play this out, and then when it gets to that point, I'll pull you out of
It's some time travel
scene.
Stuff, it's always confusing.
Because she has the tools, she kills I looked those things up, they're Combine advisors flying around. They're the head honchos. And she kills those with the stuff you have at the end of Half-Life Alyx, the Raiden lightning arms.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, it's interesting because it's she's simultaneously interacting with that moment and then essentially just getting whisked out of the timeline. I don't know how that influences how she went on from there, from when Gordon showed up and all the events of Half-Life 2.
I think we're led to believe, I could be wrong about this, that the events after the end of Half-Life Alyx still happen and she doesn't have any memory of it? Because if you think about it,
Yeah.
and of course it's a little bit weird because Gordon is a silent protagonist. Like, Gordon isn't talking to, like, Eli or Kleiner or Alyx or Barty about the G-Man. So, like, the G-Man moments sort of seem like singular events. It's almost like it hits a pause button on what's going on. Because, like, you know, at the end of Half-Life 2, like, when the Citadel's blowing up, it like literally is a pause button. And so it's like it's almost like its own time and space pocket in a weird way. So, like, whatever decisions you make there kind of seem maybe singular to that moment.
Yeah. What's odd is that somehow Eli knows about G-Man.
Right.
So did Alyx somehow remember some of it but not tell him that he was going to die? Like,
or does, like, Eli know... Did Eli somehow find out more about the G-Man on his own? Mm-hmm. And we're going to...
That's Half-Life 3 stuff.
I mean, it's very curious because it does present, you know... It does sort of present like a fork in a timeline, right? Because we saw the events happen. You even see the events happen in Alyx, you know, before you alter them. Mm-hmm. But then, then you make that change to the future.
So is the next one called Half-Life Freeman, and we're Half-Life
The
Gordon?
Freeman.
I mean, they do pass the crowbar back to you, basically.
Oh, physically.
Yeah.
I got chills when Dog showed up. I was like, oh, this Dog. Like, I totally thought, I can't remember the name of that drone who keeps trying to catch up to you and just keeps getting knocked out. And he's like, oh, he's back. Oh, no. He got knocked out again. I thought that was going to, like, become Dog at some point. I was surprised there was no Dog reference.
Wait. Oh, in Half-Life Alyx?
And Alyx, yeah.
Dog is the one that gives you the crowbar.
At the very end, but like when Gordon meets him in Half-Life 2, she's like, "Oh, this is my old friend Dog."
Right.
He's like, you know, he was built for me, and so I'm like, oh, I wonder if we're gonna see in the background, we'll see him just kind of the skeletal structure or something, and be like, "What's that?" Oh, it's a thing I'm working on, or something. But they were fairly reserved with Dog, but that was wonderful to see him pop up at the end.
Real quick, back to the G-Man, because, like, the Vortigaunts know who the G-Man is. And so, like, I'm sure there's probably information. This is definitely one of those spoiler modes where I'm like, I'm sure there's probably information that we're getting wrong and people could correct us on. But it seems like they're setting up that, like, different factions or different people have more knowledge of the G-Man than we as the player understand. And, like, it seems like the next Half-Life game, with the way that they framed it to the end of Alyx, has to cash in on that. Mm-hmm. And just reveal who his employer is.
Oh, yeah, the employers. That's a big part. I read an interview, I forget where it was now, because I was just searching around looking at stuff. And it sounds like the writers, like, really do want to keep the G-Man kind of mysterious. So it's hard to say how much we will actually learn about him. But yeah, it definitely feels like we've closed out a lot of what's going to happen with the Combine, you know, in episode 2. And now that essentially the goal is to get Alyx back, figuring out more about the G-Man or more about the G-Man's employers definitely seems to be a part of it.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the Combine because you're right about it, like, them kind of wrapping things up at the end of episode 2, but, like, we don't even really know that much about the Combine or the Zen or the G-Man. So there's, like, there's all these still. Yeah.
One thing that was interesting when I was looking up the name for those advisors is I didn't remember this, but when the train crashes right before you rescue Eli, the train has 3 advisors inside of it that were killed in the crash.
Oh, do you hear that over VO, or is that...
No, you go into one of the compartments and they're in there. Oh. And Russell's like, what are those? And Alyx is like, I don't know, because they've never even seen them before, because at that point they're only in the Citadel, you know, and they haven't been, you know, made aware of their presence, even though they're essentially running things behind the scenes.
I think that was one of the most fascinating things to experience going through it was what Alyx didn't know about our world, what they didn't know about events that we had already played. You know, I thought they handled really well just this one kind of like slice, kind of on the 50-yard line of like the grand story of Half-Life, of us, you know, knowing a little bit before, a little bit after. And I just want to talk for a little bit about just the kind of the bait and switch of, you know, walking into that center of this giant, you know, the vault, I think they call it. And, you know, it's not Gordon. It is the G-Man. I fell for that. Did everyone fall for that?
I fell for it, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember a lot of
sure.
Half-Life stuff that well.
But I mean, I thought it was a really great thing because it's obviously like you're wondering, like, is Gordon gonna have anything to do with it? I mean, this is Alyx's game. It should be Alyx's game. But then you're just kind of like, oh, of course, you know, they're going to put Gordon in it. And then like, oh man, they got me because we don't know where Gordon went. Gordon, you know, Alyx, G-Man's like, I got a job for you. And then just poof, he shows up in Half-Life 2. And like, I don't know how long I've been gone. I don't know why you specifically put me at this spot. And so it makes sense that like, yeah, there's stuff that Gordon did that was unaccounted for. And so, we'll get to see that. And then no, like, why would they need to keep Gordon in this giant thing? Why would he be that dangerous? But then again, them being that afraid of him, I don't know, it all made sense.
Right.
It's just like with these silly goggles on, just cackling to myself, like, of course it's G-Man. Why didn't I realize that?
Not that I have any idea how the vault works, but it actually kind of partly explains why Gordon was gone for so long as well. If the G-Man had been trapped in there,
yeah,
and he's the one that can, you know, bring him back. I'm curious what the time gap is between the end of Alyx and the beginning of Half-Life 2, because there definitely has to be more that happens in there. Because like you're talking about with Dog and everything that they were doing. But yeah. I
wonder if they'll allude to that in whatever new game that they have when they'll talk about like, oh, before Alyx met you, she was doing this and that.
And when Eli first tells you about the Vault, you know, he refers to it as like they've got some kind of a super weapon. So like it takes them a while to even really start realizing that it's a person up there.
Which is a funny way to refer to the G-Man, because that is an apt description of his abilities. Hello, I'm the G-Man, and I put people in stasis. Yeah. Good day. Talking about all these mysteries, though, I think there's definitely a temptation to try to unravel everything, and I think that's super fun. But what I really like about the Half-Life games, and I think Portal does a really good job of this as well, is I feel like the writers look at it from the perspective of like, okay, we have like all these puppet masters and all these things going on, but the perspective that we're telling the game from is like kind of just this average person, right? And you know, the Combine like suddenly invaded. It just happened, and like people didn't have the opportunity to like sit there and figure everything out. And so I think that's what I love about these games is it's not like you don't have somebody sitting there and just like dumping exposition on you and like connecting everything out, because that's not the people that are living through it don't have the opportunity to do that. Like they know that these aliens are here and that they have to stop them because they're taking over the world. And like that's the most pressing thing.
And it definitely feels always like a really big undertaking. It definitely feels like something that, you know, you have to question. Like what I really loved, correct me if I'm wrong, but when the vault crashes, you can't do that correctly, right? That puzzle that she like, you walk into a platform, there's like 8 switches, and she's like, and I'm just
right.
Like, let me try this one and this one, and it just crashes. Like, what a fun thing after like all these puzzles, just to be like, you're gonna screw this up. There's no way Alyx or anybody would know like what the correct thing to pull is. And they do kind of like the end of Half-Life 2, where like there's this massive explosion, and then episode 1 starts, and you're like, anyway, and it's like, what? How did Gordon fall off this like 200-story tower and just get like a pile of rubble on him, and then like, I'm okay. Alyx kind of does the same thing.
But I do think it's interesting, you know, what G-Man says, you know, about, you know, Alyx being their next hire. So it does make me think that like the next game could potentially be both of them, or we could get 2 separate games. You know, it really does kind of like leave the door wide open to where it's like, okay, we the next thing's got to happen after episode 2, but what direction they take is still be either one of them, I think.
I really hope it just picks up right where episode 2 or this ended with the crowbar in your hand.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I almost feel bad saying this because I think it would be executed much better than the story arc that I'm going to say was executed, but it almost potentially kind of reminds me of like a Halo Cortana situation where if Alyx is in the employ of G-Man, she may be like, what if you are going against her?
She's gonna be the bad guy.
You know,
now?
like what if the G-Man has convinced her that like things need to be done a certain way, and that comes into conflict with what Gordon and Eli are doing, and like that's kind of the next major conflict in the game. Of course I don't know if that's gonna happen, but
like a Fast 7 kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting though because I don't feel like the G-Man's manipulation is on that level. It's like it's a more subtle thing, you know. It's like he just drops Gordon into the situation, you know, and then the people that are there that he runs into and he reconnects with, you know, that's what sets him on the path to do what he's going to do. And so I don't feel like there's ever a point where he's going against somebody. You know,
I disagree.
Yeah.
I feel like the Vortigaunts in particular, kind of the way that they talk about him, and even Eli's attitude toward him, and I may be reading too much into this, but I definitely got the sense as the games go on that the G-Man is a more antagonistic force, a more negative force, or at least they're hinting at that, rather than being like this strictly neutral thing.
I'm not saying he's neutral. I'm just saying he's not manipulating like what somebody thinks, or like I don't think that like he would necessarily like turn somebody against somebody they already know.
Right. But Alyx could be doing something and not even realize the effect it's having on anyone else in the world. You know, you were very much kind of like, you know, even just in this game, she was very much just on a tear, like, on her own mission. And you can imagine being in that city fighting against the Combine and seeing these wires getting pulled off and being like, what the hell's going on? Like, what, you know? So, yeah, that could be very interesting. It's going to be a bummer if we play Gordon if he's not speaking in a VR game, because that was one of my favorite things about Half-Life Alyx was just a lot of her commentary throughout all of it. And not even like really great dialogue, but like I loved, I mentioned this, I think when we did our Goaty deliberations, but I can specifically say what scene now. I think one of my favorite scenes of the whole game, where you're like climbing back up this building and all of these like the dark, creepy looking head crabs are just flying everywhere and coming out of the ceiling. And when you power up that, you have to power down the gate to get through the top of it, but you power the gate down and you knock off the lights in the building. And she's like, oh no. Like just that sigh. It's like, just that way of the developers being like, like, you know, it was the thing we were going to do, you know, just sneaking through here. And that protection you felt on the other side of this glass was going away real quick. So that'd be weird.
Brandon,
not happening.
I think that's a really good point. And, you know, I do like Gordon, and I think the reason I like Gordon is because I like these games so much. But like really thinking about it, I think a reason why I like Half-Life 2 over Half-Life 1 is because of the characterization they have through things like Alyx and Eli and Kleiner and just, I don't know, the relationship that you have with those characters, it just feels so much more fleshed out. And like going back to Gordon after getting the moments with Alyx and Russell would be, and if Gordon was completely silent, I feel like that would be kind of a bummer to me. Not that they couldn't do it and it couldn't be a great game, but just kind of getting what was going on through Alex's head added so much to that world. And I'd be bummed if that was taken away.
And she was a great fit for that because she didn't understand a lot of things about the world. She had to kind of run into this journey. And so there was a lot of times she was checking in with Russell and checking in with her dad, like, what's going on while I'm doing this? And she was not as seasoned as even Gordon was, like, when Half-Life 2 starts, you know, after, you know, going through all the events at Black Mesa. And so it's a very different character to play as in this type of situation going into, you'd have to have a bigger cast or have people kind of, you know, talking more to him. How's my dad? He doesn't have a leg.
Yeah.
He didn't have a leg before. Oh well, he's still gone.
Yeah.
I got it. So you're Gordon. You don't talk though, but you're with Dog most of the game. So you don't even have to talk to each other. The most you could do with Gordon is give him a thumbs up, and that's about it.
I wonder if you could. I mean, now we're just in raw speculation territory, but like the Portal 2 co-op was really interesting, and I wonder if you could do something like that with whatever the next Half-Life project is, where like somebody else is playing Dog, right? And they have things that only they can do.
That could be interesting.
Yeah.
That feels like forced co-op, but I wonder if they'd want to do that. Or they'd have to
Right.
make the AI good enough, I guess, so you don't even have to worry about Dog.
Right. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, are they gonna? They have to, right? Like they have to tackle Borealis in the next game, right? Like that's just the whole thing that's left unresolved.
They don't have to do shit, man. I don't expect them to do anything.
they can put this whatever time they want. This can be
They
another
just
prequel.
do a prequel again, or like even further back now.
Yeah, what were some of the just like more memorable sequences? We talked about Jeff. You know, to one thing that I
We
thought
haven't
was
talked about Jeff here
a little bit. We haven't talked about Jeff here, yeah.
Fair point, yeah.
But one, I just thought other characters were done very well, because that's a very tricky thing to do in VR, is have somebody like stare directly at you and like have to follow their gaze. And I thought the characters did a really good job referencing where I was, soldiers and NPCs that I was talking to. Just curious if there are any interactions that stood out.
I don't know about character interactions. I just think about like the moments of stuff happening to me when I'm playing. You know, the first time you successfully feel like you got the hang of the VR, like the reloading and like using the grenades all fluid together. That's the kind of stuff I think about. I guess the train part kind of like maybe like step back a little just because of the scale of it. Was like so intense compared to what you've been going through the whole game. I mean, it's just like a train crashing when you think about it, but I guess it's that beauty of VR where it can just feel larger than life kind of thing.
Yeah, I would definitely I definitely think that like because they're so limited, every character interaction you have is like it actually does feel like very significant. And like I love all the conversations with Russell. I love how he's just like slightly insensitive, like slightly lacks the empathy, like
Right.
He cares about his gloves.
Right.
But he's like, he talks about your dad and like, oh, he might die or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, that's your dad. Yeah, got it. It's like,
They might took out his brain, or wait, no, maybe not. Oh, yeah, still your dad. Yeah.
and then there's a guy, I don't remember a whole lot about, but there's the guy that you meet when you first encounter Jeff, who kind
The
of
construction guy or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what his name was
Hanging
again.
upside down. See if I can pull his name.
To
and
bounce
then
off.
the Vortigaunt himself is like
Oh, yeah.
super great.
To
I
bounce
love
off-
how the Vortigaunt says stuff like "go to the Northern Star," and it seems like just complete nonsense. And then he's like, "See, oh, there's the hotel named the Northern Star."
Larry. That's the guy's name.
Larry.
Ben, you were saying?
To bounce off what Blood was said about Russell, like I play a lot of JRPGs, and one of the sins of the genre is like they do a lot of like stranger in a strange land, fish out of water kind of stuff. But when they do it, it's always like in the most heavy-handed way. It's like, oh, you're new here, like let me sit down and explain how our entire civilization works. And what I like about Half-Life Alyx is the writers, I feel like, never relied on that kind of exposition. You have moments, because like Alyx, you learn things about the world through Alyx, but it's only framed in a way that like would be natural for her. Like there's this conversation, and I think it especially resonated with me since I was playing it in 2020, and what a shit year that was, where like Russell was kind of comparing the world like post-Combine with pre-Combine and like the small comforts, but then also acknowledging like, well, like, yeah, things were pretty messed up before all this happened too. Like,
Right.
It was a little better, but it was still pretty messed up. And I just
Yeah, what he like gave it like a 6 or something, right? Yeah. Like what was it like before this? Oh, it's like like a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, and so that conversation just really stuck out to me, and I think said so much about Russell, and it was cool because it made the world more relatable in a way where it like, as somebody who's going through, you know, a pandemic, you're like, yeah, Russell is right. Like, just things, there's always so much to work through, I guess, regardless of what's going on.
Well, I was really moved when Russell was talking about the weapon before they assumed that it was Gordon. And he said, well, why would they be scared of this? Maybe they're going to use it. And she said, yeah, like, why are they having it trapped? Why don't they just use it on Earth? And he said, because they already won the war. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, right. You know, it's like, if you've looked outside lately, but like, war, why? Why would they need to? Like, you know, they don't have to worry about humans anymore. And it felt good, you know, the bleakness anytime they kind of set up, like, you know, the huge mountain that they had to climb to confront the Combine. It felt nice being like, yay, they win. Or at least like they give them a good fight, you know, like at least we have some fun stuff, which again, it's, if you have not played Half-Life 2 or episodes 1 and 2, like it's nice. It's nice to go through this and kick a little Combine ass. I loved the like, where'd she go? She's downstairs. You know, it's like one more target.
Yeah.
One thing that I loved that is just, and I'm not entirely sure that, like, if I think about it, like, they really convinced me that wouldn't work, but basically when Russell is trying to explain, like, alcohol to her, she's like,
oh, right.
So, you know, and she has, like, no reference point because, you know, she just wasn't around in those days. I mean, it's like, I feel like they would still have gotten some form of alcohol around, but, you know, maybe she just wasn't around it or experienced it.
Something. Yeah, that would be priority one.
Just talking about one moment I remember from the zoo. You're like, there's like a statue almost of a gorilla, and they were talking about like the head crabs taking over people. And she's like, oh man, I'd sure hate for it to happen to one of those things. And I was like, oh shit, am I going to fight a gorilla? And they just don't. And I'm like, you got me there, Half-Life. I like that.
The zoo is probably my favorite section of the entire game. Like, outside of Jeff.
Yeah.
Just because, like, I love zoos. I love animals. I love going and watching them. And I always love when media does this. It takes something that's like kind of comforting to you and flips it on its head, like clowns. Well, right. I guess clowns aren't comforting to anyone, but the point that I'm trying to say is it takes something comforting and sort of flips it on its head. And like, of course you have a lot of intense moments with enemies in the zoo, but just seeing this place that like held these creatures and how broken it is, and just like the wear and tear that has happened to it, and just how quiet it is, like it's just terrifying on its own.
It was like refreshing almost getting there, because a lot of the game you're in very like small room apartment, underground sewers, everything's fucking filthy and gross,
right?
And you get to the zoo and you're like, oh man, I feel like I'm in nature almost, kind of.
That one like Predator moment, where there's like head crabs in the bush. I was like, you see the little leaves like moving to the side. What was funny is I was playing this, you know, I was trying to make sure I made time before Godey's, and I was looking ahead at the chapter names, and that was chapter 8. It's called Captivity. And I remember being like, how many chapters did I got left? And I was in Jeff at the time, and I looked and I'm like, next chapter is called Captivity. And I was like, oh, we probably get kidnapped. I'm like, every shooter's got to do that. You got to have the moment where you get kidnapped. You don't have your gear.
Bad guy looking at you.
So you got to get your gear back, and then you like slowly fight your way out. You got to stealth. And then like I got into the mission and was like, oh, Captivity. I got it. I see what you did there. Well, even just like breaking the glass or like, you know, like stepping into these, you know, cages or setting these enclosures like felt weird. I like the little head crab joke where they have the little like bed off in the corner and the head crab just like crawls out of it. And you're like, what are you doing? I love how scared I was originally with head crabs. And then by the time I got to that point, it was just like pop, pop, pop.
Or you're just like, oh, just a head crab. Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, the poison head crabs. They're the worst.
And like a weird example of like quote unquote humor that they would do with like these aliens, because they make just the worst sounds, these like death groans, or like they seem like they're so much in pain. But there's like one that's on a map that's just like and like you don't even need to kill it, like it's just like it's not even like in blocking anything. I'm just like it's bizarre, like head crab humor.
I feel like kind of how Russell and Alyx talk about the enemies, that's another thing that I think adds so much believability to the world, where I don't think they like take them lightly, but they're like so used to these creatures being around that they like, I feel like they can kind of joke about it, like there's just this familiarity with which they discuss what's going on, that it's like, yeah, that makes sense, like this isn't new to them.
That's just normal for them at this point.
Right.
Like you watch, I don't know, like Walking Dead or some shit, you're on season 8 or whatever, there's a walker, everyone's like,
whatever.
yeah.
It's just like
Leggies.
take it out the trash. Yeah.
That's a leggy. That's an antline. No, those are leggies.
Yeah.
Did you shoot antlines ever? I shot a couple in that one like train yard scene, but I dodged like all of them during the zoo encounter. Yeah,
I killed them all, dude.
I saved up such a
Definitely
ridiculous amount of ammo. Like outside, when you're like out there, I was just like,
dude, I was channeling like Starship Troopers, and I was like, let's go, dude.
I think the antlions might have been my favorite enemies to fight, because you're like popping off their legs, and then they like open up and you shoot them in the center. It's just you feel like a gunslinger when you're doing it, just because you're like pinpointing areas. Yeah, it's great.
Kind of reminded me of Dead Space, just shooting off the
Oh yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
sure.
I love there's one point where there's a couple of guys up on a tower looking down and shooting at them, and they're just oblivious to you, and there's this barrel right next to him. It's like, bye-bye.
yeah.
red barrels.
I cheesed so many guys. I felt bad because you can just, it's VR, so you can really just see like through the tiniest crack and like pop pop.
Yeah, it's part of the fun though.
Feels bad.
I did love grabbing barrels and just like throwing them into barnacles and seeing how many I could blow up at a time.
That is something that's nice about VR, that you don't get when you're playing like a regular shooter, where it's like, well, if I was actually in this situation, I would have these options available to me. But, because I'm playing this corridor shooter, like I can only crouch behind these waist-high walls and like get over cover. And so it's nice feeling like you have a little bit more ingenuity at your disposal.
God, just being able to like lean to the side and dodge a head crab was so satisfying.
Yeah.
Once I got around the antlines, I was just I played the whole thing by teleporting, and so I'd just wait until one of them like, and then would jump at me and like, oh, bye.
Yeah, I think it was really designed around that control scheme very well.
Yeah, sneaking up on a guy with a shotgun headshot, it felt really good. Didn't even know you were there, and then you're just like via magic, like.
Yeah, it's
I'm
definitely
right
OP.
behind
I played with both at the same time, like for a lot of movement, but like if you really wanted to like be OP, yeah, you just like teleport. Pew, 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 pew.
But at the same time, like, it does make you think about things a little bit differently, because I did test out some of the other control options, and there was just a different feeling when I could like walk backwards,
Oh yeah,
especially with the antlions. Like, all right, I'm gonna walk away and keep shooting.
yeah, it's great.
Yeah, so it's what I mean. It's like it feels like it's a little bit more designed around teleporting being your tool of movement.
I just
do
teleporting for motion sickness.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't quite get sick, but it just felt a little.
I mean, I did also for
funky.
speed. I wanted to get through the game as quickly as possible. And it's just nice to. There's just some areas where like. Boop, 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 boop.
And particularly points, Ben, where like you're having to like mount up and like get onto objects and stuff. Like doing that without teleporting always felt weird, and definitely gave me that like jump in my stomach
It
kind
would
of
just
feeling.
like teleport you almost anyways.
Yeah.
Something I was reminded of watching the review again that I don't feel like we really talked about in Goaty is traversal in the game. I mean, we give a lot of credit, rightfully so, to some of the storytelling stuff and the shooting, but I think even just how you're moving through the world is really impressive, and like how hazardous it is in its own way, and how like again true to the world it is. Like you get like. Because the world is so destroyed, like very rarely are you like going from point A to point B. You've got to like crawl through holes and like get on top of rooftops and like climb down on things. And so I think all of that stuff was handled really well without making it like a pain in the ass or beyond the capabilities of the platform, I guess.
Yeah, I really appreciated the spaces when, you know, you would be in like a multi-story building and looking down like through the different layers and the different floors and figuring out like, okay, what do I need to do to actually like move through this environment? And like Last of Us 2 had similar situations and similar level designs, but there is just something about when you're in VR, like that sense of I could fall off of this, you know, gives it a different emotional stakes.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, I liked that even though I was super powerful, there was still like a ton of threat. I like this one sequence where like they gave me a lot of explosive barrels, and I was like, haha, zombie guy, I'm gonna hit you with this, and I threw it near him and I'm aiming and he just like whacks it at me and I'm like, no, stop. I'm supposed to shoot the thing, you're not supposed to do that, you know. Like there was, and especially like the first couple zombie encounters when you're just getting used to the pistol, was just like, man, is every section gonna be like this? This is really tricky. I went back and watched like the first gameplay video that they revealed of the game, and like the person playing like blatantly, you know, puts themselves in harm's way just to be like trapped. Like, they're everywhere. And it's like, well, you ran into the train. Yeah, that'll happen if you go a little bit too quick in that game. But just the threat was always there, which I enjoyed.
Speaking, man, this game is so good. Speaking of the train and like learning how to shoot, basically in the game, it's handled so well because like in the very beginning, you have like a zombie going by and it's like it's outside the window. And it's like clear that it's set up for like this tutorial kind of target practice sort of section, but the lighting and the sound and like you kind of going through this train, it's still like really terrifying and captivating. And so like unlike so many other games where you just sort of are like, okay, time to go through the tutorial, and it just feels like kind of like having to eat your vegetables before you can have your fun. Like I just don't feel like Half-Life Alyx really like they don't kind of succumb to that philosophy. They teach you very naturally and in situations that are very engaging.
Well, you never. I think it's like 3 or 4 shots takes out a head crab, but not always. You know, like sometimes like you get lucky, you're like 1, 2 and it's out. And so I love that moment of like the pistol on a head crab, like. Okay. Like, are you gonna move? Or like you kill the zombie and he falls and the head crab rolls off and you're like, okay. Like, and that's what's so great about the shotgun, where you're just like, you know what, dude, I'm not dealing with you. I'm not like, you're the last guy in this room. I got a bunch of shells. I am just taking this dude out. Or those like metal ones. Just like, I am not
Oh yeah. We have to really time it.
That reminds me of Resident Evil, Brandon, where like you would randomly get like a crit and shoot off their head and being like, yes, I saved ammo. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like you knew there was one area, it was you were dealing with cranes. They were like wooden planks, and there were guys shooting at you, and they would knock all the planks out of the way. And then you had to operate these 2 cranes and like put this platform together to walk across it. And like right when you move the first crane, you like trigger this crab way far in the room, and it like slowly makes its way over to where you are. It's just funny, like playing through the section a couple times and just waiting there, like with my gun pointed at the doorway. I'm just like, come on, get in here. I conserved way too much ammo. This game was ridiculous. When the guns went away, I was like, no. I had like 400 machine gun rounds left. Like, oh well. I guess I should have unloaded a little bit earlier.
Yeah, that's funny because for me, I had an abundance of pistol rounds, but I always felt like I always had like just slightly more than I needed. Like it was always, you know.
Yeah.
Like, I would run out of shotgun shells, but like, okay, I've still got some machine gun bullets left, you know, and like, all right, this is starting to get a little low. I need some ammo. Where is it? You know, and I would get 1 or 2 and like, okay, we can keep going a little ways.
I really love how they handled grenades and just like how limited you were with what you could hold and how useful they could be. And yeah, like you were talking about using the shotgun to be like, I just don't want to deal with this right now. Like, I feel like grenades held a similar kind of purpose.
Well, I love the grenades because not only was it limited, but I was like, man, I hope I don't fuck up throwing this thing.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I can
When
just accidentally
when you
mess
shoot
up.
it, when you land, like when you just toss it right in the perfect
Yeah.
spot, or you throw it somewhere and the guy like runs to cover right there. You're like, yes. Or catch it, like you can just, which isn't necessarily a spoiler thing. We've talked about that a lot, but just like that just never felt bad every single time. Just like it was so organic and so
Oh my
so
God,
simple.
yeah.
Whoever on the team came up with that, like
Gravity Gloves, dude, like
it was
made
so,
that game so much better. Like would not even be as close. If
And
they
I
didn't
had
have
a
it.
lot of expectations going into the ending because Ben, had been, give it such a glowing review. And I remember I told him, I was like, I got one chapter left. And Ben, you were like, that chapter. I'm like, I know, I can't wait. And so like when it's reminded me of the end of Half-Life 2 when you're like, oh my God, suddenly I'm just so super powered. But I still thought they did it in a fun way. And it was a fun evolution of, it's sad to see your weapons go, but fun again, just to be like, this is the perfect way to wrap this up. Just like,
Well, and it's interesting there too, with the lightning
grenades
hands.
at zero G. Just,
Even then, like you're still like you're not really that limited, but you still have to worry about resources. Like you just can't spam it. It's like, okay, I've shot my lightning, and now I got to go find another capsule or whatever they are.
Brandon, just kind of touching on the ending, like 2007 was Half-Life 2 Episode 2, and like I can't imagine what it was like at Valve. Where they're like, okay, we're gonna make a new Half-Life game.
Yeah.
Okay, what are we gonna do? And I'm really truly incredibly impressed that like this is the direction that they decided to go,
Right.
because it simultaneously manages to be a good reintroduction into a world that's been gone for a very long time, while also feeling narratively consequential and pushing things forward. Like they do both kind of at the same exact time.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is exactly the direction you needed to take with this particular game right now.
I was so skeptical when it first got announced. I was like, I'm stoked to play Alyx because she's wonderful, but like a prequel?
Oh yeah,
Right.
I think everybody felt that way.
How into a prequel am I going to be? And even like starting it up, I was like, okay, like this. It's like, oh no, I got to save my dad. I hope he survives. There's just a lot of that. I'm like, there's just the stakes aren't necessarily here. And then it's like, I don't care if there are no stakes. I'm loving being her. I'm loving being in this world.
Right.
I'm loving him explaining like how to make a ham sandwich. I love just like he's like what's vodka like? Like, oh, it's terrible. It's terrible stuff. Just like, oh, so you don't like it? Oh, I love it. Like, what?
What I think is interesting is it avoids so many of the prequel traps, because it's like it doesn't suddenly like introduce like these crazy new enemy types or anything or weapons, and you're just like, well, where was that? It's the things that are there are largely familiar to you, but presented in ways that they still feel significant. You still are seeing some of these things, perhaps because of being in Alyx's shoes, she's seeing these things for the first time and trying to figure out what they are, and so kind of experiencing that moment with her. The one part we didn't talk about yet towards the end, but not quite there, was the Strider encounter. Where you come across that thing and you're like, is it dead? And you're like, don't mess with it. Don't touch that thing.
Yeah.
And then having to avoid it, and then the turret at the end of it, and just the feeling of like holding on to that thing and reloading it.
I jinxed it.
We kind of talked about this beginning, like lingering questions and what happens sort of in the time between games. But like, I'm really curious to know, like, what happened to Russell after this? Like, what's going on with that character? Are they dead? Are we going to see them in the next game? Because it's always weird when you have a character kind of introduced in a prequel, and you're like, I've never seen them before. And of course, I love Russell and think they're a great addition. But I wonder how that story.
Hopefully they show up in the next game.
Yeah. Dude, Russell is the G-Man.
I was thinking, like, dude, he's grouped up with the G-Man.
Yeah, I loved him. Like, I met somebody named Jeff. Just like, oh, we need all the help we can get. That's great.
Yeah.
It's like, no, Jeff's not very helpful. And just the there was so much humor. We hinted at it when we talked during Goaties, but like I just want to rattle off a couple spoilers because they were so great. We talked about Jeff, but like specifically like going into that gated area, and it's so clear when you go back through it. They're like, oh, I can just knock these boxes out of the way and go this way, but you're so scared to get away from Jeff, you just automatically run straight to the end of that hallway and like shit. And then that one head crab that's just like waltzing towards the bottles. You're like, no, you're gonna knock him over. Yeah. And like, there's one drawer you open up and a bottle just rolls out, and I was like, oh. Like it's just so easy to catch, but at the same time, it's just hard enough to catch that it gives you that jolt of like, thanks, Valve. Okay, I'll put that down gently. There was one gate that had a mannequin that just like falls out like right when you open it up. And you've seen like 20 mannequins up to that point, but I was like, damn it. Like, genius. The whole, you alluded to it, Blood, but the room with the explosives, just barrels everywhere. And I was like, maybe if I sneak over here and shoot them. Like,
yeah, that happened to me too.
No.
Like, oh, I'm dead.
Yeah, I think it's some of the best like physical comedy in a game probably since Portal. In a lot of ways.
But it fits the whole world. And not only in the self-contained game that they made, it like reminds you of, there's just a lot of explosive humor. There's just a lot of like fun, great physics, in Portal games that people have never played the first Half-Life. Like it's the same kind of vibe. But just that, careful with the equipment, kind of like that's just kind of the theme that goes through all of it. And so you just, those moments where you blow yourself up, like Alyx You're like, haha, whoops. You got a little too close to the fire that time. But yeah, just thinking of all of the like the vehicles that you drive in Half-Life 2, there's a lot of stuff that Gordon does, just like, whoa, I wonder if they're curious to tackle that in VR.
Sure.
Because
Well, that's the question is like, will they go back to VR? I mean, it's given them so many fun tools, but at the same time,
it's so
like
limited.
The limited audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest complaints is that people just can't play it.
Watching, and this is why I'm scared, because I respect it from the bottom of my heart, but listening to interviews about Half-Life Alyx and them just talking about Half-Life in general, the general sentiment is like, we don't want to make a Half-Life game if it's not pushing something forward, right? Like we want like the whatever Half-Life we're making, we want that to be like a benchmark somehow. And it's like, well, okay, what's that going to be? And you feel like when that is your kind of expectation, of course it's going to be, you're going to have these huge gaps between games.
Like you tell me you're going to have to wait for another like VR equivalent technology or something.
Right. And
but that is what they were saying though, is that like, well, it's not going to be another 13 years, but
it's going to be 20.
Yeah. Right.
But it sounds like even though they don't want to lock down what that world is going to be, they do have, a spark to move forward right now.
Yeah. In a way, as much as I adored Half-Life Alyx, and if they announced like, hey, the next one we're making is in VR, I think just for the sake of having more people play it, I would be super okay with it not being VR. Or if they went like a Resident Evil 7 route where you could do both.
I kind of wish whatever their next Half-Life game is kind of like a homecoming back to their PC roots, like very focused on PC kind of thing. It's like I love VR and I thought it was really great, but I think it'd be awesome if they just kind of celebrated the kind of platform that got them this huge following in the first place. Obviously, I want them to do something new, but I would hope you could play it just normally.
Yeah, and it's funny, Brad, because like going back to Half-Life 2, and like them talking about, we don't want to release a new Half-Life game unless it's like pushing things forward. It's like, well, Half-Life, like there's not really anything like Half-Life, really. Like you take away, like it's already kind of unique in and of itself, right? Like even Half-Life 2, I think is still like a pretty remarkable game compared to a lot of what is out there. And so like, while I certainly admire that aggressive need for like new ideas and all that stuff, it's like I'm so hungry for this style of game and storytelling and world design and all that stuff. Like it feels just remarkable in and of itself.
Like I'm just hungry for more Valve games in general, like the kind of Valve games I enjoyed. Like it feels like the last 10, 15 years or whatever, they've been so focused on Dota and like Artifact, which is great, but it's just like, man, can you go back to making kind of games that I liked from you?
Right.
And like this was kind of a in the right direction thing, so
Yeah.
I'm even more like my expectations are even higher for them now to have a game sooner than before or later.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is sort of the balance between how they're like, well, we know more about this character or that thing or whatever, but we also don't have a Bible or anything laying it all out. Like they haven't focused on a bunch of plot points to lock themselves into. It's like, they know enough so that something is, they can present something to have a rich backstory to it that they're not going to share. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like, we're going to make the story that's going to fit this game, not create this huge metaverse and then figure out what part of that to cut out and make into a game.
That kind of sounds like The Legend of Zelda in a way,
Sure.
which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Zelda, realistically, for all the timeline theories there are out there, I mean, it's like they're just going to make whatever story fits the kind of game they're making.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one of the things that it strangely has going for it is even Half-Life 2 was a while. I remember them demoing Half-Life 2 at E3, and they showed, like, look how far we've come since the first game came out. Like, just look at the G-Man. Like, look how much, much more developed he is. And even, like, when you first see Eli, he's like, let me get a good look at you, Gordon, it's been a while. And so that's almost kind of like part of the lore, is that you do got to wait a little bit, but then you get to enjoy it. And just echoing what we were saying earlier, Ben, but I went through so many emotions playing this, just remembering how much I love Half-Life, getting back into this world, remembering these characters, remembering how much I love these characters, and it being so much longer than I thought it was going to be. I was really thought like, okay, I'm getting into the end. Okay, I realized we saved my dad, here we go. And then like checking like, wait, I'm in chapter 7 of 11? Like, okay, wow, this is a big beefy game. This is not just like a test. This is not just something that they whipped together. This is something that they've been working on for a long time. So if it's worth the wait, I'm willing.
I feel like this almost never happens because like I was praising the direction they decided to take with the story, but in a way, I think what is almost as remarkable, if not more remarkable, is it's been so long since a Half-Life game, and you jump into this, and it feels exactly like you remember Half-Life feeling. It's like it's like something where it's like it's so dear to you that like there has to be the right sounds, there has to be the right look, there has to be like everything has to be on point when you love something this much. And like Half-Life Alyx doesn't miss a beat, even with Alyx being voiced by a completely new person. It was like everything clicked into place for me, and I feel like you don't get that with almost anything. Like when there's huge gaps, like something's a little off here, or they didn't get this quite right, or I don't like the direction that they took here. Like I feel like Valve demonstrated a remarkable understanding of their own property here, and
got some new fun little bits in there. The lightning lizard, I don't remember. Was that a episode 1 or 2 thing before?
The lightning. I don't even remember this enemy in Alyx.
So he's a real quick little guy. He's like a little gecko guy, and he just runs around and he'll like lightning short stuff out. And then when it dies, it becomes like a little pulse of lightning, which you then use for to power things up. And it disrupts communication, so you can't talk to Russell while it's happening. And so like, after a lot of those fights, he's like, when you finally kill the thing, he's like, wait, I got you. Are you all right? And you're like, yeah, I just bumped into one of these crazy things. And I love I love there's one puzzle where you have to go like downstairs with them, and it's like it's almost like you're in hell. It's just these orange like creepy walls and zombies walking around. And I loved like getting back upstairs, and I have the thing to power it, and then I need another one. And I was like, oh, do I have to go down there? And I'm like, oh, it's right there.
Yeah, you look down. Yeah.
I love that. Those little beats, like they not only know. And Ben, you have said my favorite statement about this game, which is it's clear the developers know what I'm going to think. Like, you really feel in touch. And it's like in that moment where they're like, not only do we realize you're going to recognize that, we know where you're probably going to be standing when you do. So you can just literally look down and see it and go, and like, but you don't, when you see it initially, you don't think, well, that's going to be a thing. It's like, I loved, and something that it just, not to be like elitist, but like if people ever get the chance to play this in VR, it's not gonna quite, or not in VR, it's not gonna quite have the same punch. But these like growing pulsing things, they're like the more you get close, they like, and you have to like you have to blow up so you can access something, and it's like just the threat I don't think is gonna be there if you're like 10 feet away from your TV and just like, let me get close to it. Okay, back up. It's just something about
it's
like,
a
right
very VR enemy.
But yeah, some fun new exchanges. When at the same time, that little like radio, like boop, boop, like every time you kill a guy, that's just like so, I don't know, so Half-Life, so specific.
Yeah.
And just like junk. It's like, it was always interesting talking to people about Half-Life 2 and being like, this game is so revolutionary, and they would see it and it's like, this game looks terrible. It's like there's mud everywhere and everything's like derelict, and I'm just like, yeah, but that's City 17. That's the vibe. It's a strange futuristic game to play.
Mm-hmm. This is such a like shitty game journalist thing to say, because it's really hard to pinpoint it exactly, but just bouncing off talking about how like them really having an understanding of what's going through the player's head. I love this, and I feel like it's so hard to do as a designer. I went through Half-Life Alyx, I feel like, with the like always the appropriate amount of resistance. Like Blood, you were kind of talking about how like you always just had a little bit more ammo than you need to, but there was never like a puzzle or an encounter or anything where I was like, okay, I'm over this. Like I'm stuck. I can't get through that. I didn't have that like just moment of like, like this game is really cool, but I don't like this part. Like there was just such a polished sheen to it where I never felt like it was a breeze. I never felt like it was boring, but I never felt like it was making me do stuff that I hated doing. Other than, I guess, the little mini games.
I was about to bring that up. I was like, I got real sick of that shit.
Oh, did you?
I
liked them.
I was like, it's cool, but like, every time, man.
I really enjoyed this. Brad, I didn't realize until about 60% of the way through that you could move the ball.
Yeah,
oh, really?
That's cool.
Oh man,
I was just constantly like, okay.
Well, then you can also like let go and take things.
Yeah, I think that's like a really cool puzzle, and like doing it's really cool. But it just felt like such padding and such a halt at every single thing.
I need you to have that opinion, Brad. That's very important.
No,
I need that.
Brad, I'm with
you.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I would say that while I did not like those mini games, or they got grading over time, at least I knew how to solve them. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't that moment where I was
I wasn't like,
I have no idea what to do here.
Yeah.
And from
I'd say the one thing that and I think this is partly just like the limitations on your space and your setup individually, but the tracing things through the walls.
Mm-hmm.
While I liked it, there were definitely times where I'm like, I have to like get down a little bit lower than where the sensors can see me, or like. I have to put my hand up and like, the ceiling fan's there. I forgot about that. Good thing it's turned off. Those
moments definitely made me remember I was playing a VR game a lot, where I had to be very conscious of my surrounding.
Blood, I am with you. I do kind of feel like it was a limitation of my own setup, because like I am in a very crowded space, and like this isn't just with Half-Life Alyx. I feel like every time I play VR, like I end up like punching the TV or something. Like it always ends up happening.
I had a lot of trouble with switches that needed to like stay. Like the after you fight Jeff and you have to like do that little thing to open up the vault or that you drop down into after you like lock Jeff away. I couldn't time that, because I'd be like, all right, I gotta grab this thing and hold it down and then and then this would just let go in my right hand. And I'd be like, stay there. Like, I don't know why. I was playing this on a Quest 2.
Okay.
So I was telling a Quest 2 to pretend to be a Rift to play a game on the Index. So it's a little bit of it's a very actually Half-Life way to do things, like to just kind of jerry rig something together to work in a certain way. But And well, the other thing, Brad, about those like weird little orb line puzzles is they're not contextualized at all. Like you don't know like why would I have to solve this to open this thing?
Yeah, it's just some lock.
But what I did like is that like near the end when you would open those up and look at it for the first time, you'd be like, what the hell?
Yeah, it's like crazy.
Then you kind of
alien
start
tech.
to move it and be like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, I got it. Boop, solved it. All right, you know. So like it would make you feel smarter than I think you are because you'd be like, I solved it. And it's like, it's not, you know. These lines need to go through these things. It's not rocket science, but
yeah. I mean, I guess I don't think it was presented this way, but it would be interesting if that was presented as sort of a lock-picking scenario rather than this is the only way this thing opens.
Sure.
Because if this is the only way this thing opens, it's completely stupid and insecure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's just in a world where I felt like so much was contextualized so well, it just was like the mini games of the moment where it was like, this is a video game. It kind of reminds me of the pipe dream hacking in BioShock.
sure.
Where it's like, all right, why?
Yeah, totally.
I still really enjoyed them, and personally, I didn't get sick of them though.
Well,
Yeah.
I enjoy in like Elder Scrolls games where like a lockpick unlocks everything. You know, it's like the treasure chest that's a month old and 500 years old, same lock. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Lock tech is not advanced in that time.
This is not relevant to Half-Life Alyx at all, but I just have to bring it up because I completely forgot about it. I was watching somebody stream Oblivion, and I forgot the like dialogue persuasion system that game has is with the wedges. Do you remember that? And like it's like you're like manipulating how they feel about you through wedges. It's such a weird system that I completely forgot about. And it was just one of those moments where I was like, "Oh right, this thing, this stupid."
It's funny because like
system.
I haven't played Oblivion, so I don't have the reference point, and so like my brain is just like filling it in with like something that looks like orange sponge cake. I don't even.
Sure.
Yeah,
Now I'm hungry. Now I want.
it's really I had completely forgotten.
Now I want pie. We're gonna have to wrap up this spoiler mode. Anything else we want to touch on in Half-Life Alyx before we go play it again, man? I'm tempted to go.
I know that I've said it in one of the previous discussions, but there was that moment when the Combined soldiers, like, you know, a couple of moments actually when they were like kind of disguising their voice and like trying to be friendly, like, "Hey, Alyx," you know, and, like you little. Ugh.
And I said this before, but there was one point where I got trapped behind a glass window and I don't know if the developers really intended me to be that confused or like intended that for
That happened to me.
to be a bit, but it was so revelatory when I was like, how do I get through this glass? And I'm like, oh, for this chair, this brick, anything in my hand, you know, like it doesn't matter. But it's just it's neat that they didn't require you to do those things and just sort of like constantly throwing new stuff at you. And just how unsettling that ending is. We're just like seeing a room split in half, or stuff upside down, or things changing as you move around, or just having the G-Man like appear here, like you know, like, just so much fun
the spatial of him walking around you,
hearing him like swarm around.
I just want to say I'm sorry if we got anything wrong.
Oh, sure.
I'm sure we did.
I always feel that way on spoiler
Yeah, I'm
modes.
sure we did.
We'll
Yeah.
find
But
out.
I mean, Half-Life is an interesting subject because, like, yes, there are things that you could get wrong, but at the same time, you know, like you're saying, like one of the brilliant parts of it is that, like, they do just sort of leave these things up for you to interpret and put the pieces together. So
Yeah.
I like that there are
is
videos
fun.
out there where you can piece together, or people have pieced together extra lore in Half-Life 2 through newspapers that are just like up on the wall. And there's just a lot of great, like, there were a couple moments where I would just like see a book or something and like look on the cover and be like, nice. Like, I at least know who that character is. Like, I can't read Russian. I don't know like, or what the, you know, I'm not filled in completely on all this stuff, but there's some fun visual information in there that you can pick up.
well, yeah, like at the point that I pointed out earlier with the advisor and the train.
Yeah,
you know, like,
I forgot about that. I missed it.
I didn't catch that as being significant until I was like reading the Wikipedia entry and I'm like, oh, really? And then I went back and like watched somebody like who had recorded that part and like, oh crap, like this is actually significant, but it went over my head.
Yeah, man. Here we are. We did it. The near insurmountable task of, making something that holds up to the older games and making us not be angry at the Half-Life franchise anymore.
Yeah.
We completely come around.
How awesome is it that not only did a new Half-Life game come out, but it was so good that it won our Game of the Year. That's like, that is truly a dream come true.
Yeah.
And
It does seem
I'm
kind
not
of
a
like
big
a
Half-Life
fantasy
fan.
situation. Yeah.
And like, what was the announcement to release timing? It was like 2 months, 2.5 months, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it was pretty quick.
crazy.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you, gentlemen, for discussing. Thank you for being patrons if you are watching this video. We will have more spoiler modes for you to enjoy. And if you have not got to play Half-Life Alyx and are just like, just tell me story moments. I just got to hear from the horse's mouth why this game is so special. Hopefully we have done a good job explaining that. And we will see you in the next spoiler mode.
Thank you.